Hope you all been doing well. Let's get this situated here. It's been a while since the last Helix video, and I think we've all been in eager anticipation of Helix 3.0 update. And I had a lot of great ideas for videos that I didn't want to waste just in case 3.0 made it totally irrelevant. But to make up for that, over the next couple weeks, there's going to be a lot of Helix instructional videos, stuff like what you're about to watch here. So in this video, we've got 3 different presets for the Fender Princeton. We had a new model added in 3.0 called the US Princess. It's the Fender Princeton. We also have 2 cabinets to go along with it. So a 1x10, which is traditionally what you would expect in a Princeton, and then a 1x12, which is a nice option to have as well. So in this video, we're going to look at 3 different ways to tune that amp, 3 different ways you can use it. This is based upon my own experience playing Princeton amps. They're some of my favorite ones. And there's some discrepancies between the Helix controls and what a Fender Princeton is actually capable of, for instance, the mid knob. So we're not going to talk too much about the specifics. I want to focus on actually just getting a great end product, because chances are the audience is not going to be coming up and looking through your Helix settings. So yeah, let's just get started. You'll see timestamps in the description here. If you feel like one preset isn't working out for your own playing style, maybe one of the other 2 will. So on the first one, what you just heard in the beginning was called the Brite Prince. Let's start with the Warm Prince. I have 3 here on the left: Warm Prince, Brite Prince, Mad Prince, all that I've tuned with a single coil guitar. Although I played them with humbuckers, and basically what you just get is a much thicker sound and with a little bit more gain. So I think they're usable with both types of instruments. Usually my process here is to design them on my studio monitors at home when I've got plenty of free time, and then I'll take them out and test them on a couple different front of house systems because of the current circumstances. Luckily I'm still working at a church, so I have a nice front of house system to test it on, but usually I would like to test it on a lot of different stuff before I put it out. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. And I know I'm a little bit late with the 3.0 videos, but I like to try and make sure everything I put out is really polished and absolutely the best I can do. So here's my take on the Fender Princetons. The first one here, Warm Prince. This is modeled around a lot of the way that I like to use my Supro, actually. So it's a clean platform with a little bit of breakup, not much to it, but it's very much a warm tone that you can stack some overdrives on top of nicely. And we're using a Prince of Tone copy, the Heir Apparent, in boost mode. So let's see what this is going to sound like. Cool. You're going to see some parameter adjustments here. So in this preset, I've built it up with some. You can see the bass and the treble are going to change when I hit foot switch 1, which is going to activate the compressor, and also the EQ tilt block, which was added in, I want to say 2.7 or 2.8. This is a really useful thing to do. So let's see what this will sound like. If you felt like that first tone was too warm, this is going to brighten it up a little bit, make it a little bit more mid-focused. We'll compare it with the first one. So I really like to use the tilt EQ to kind of provide a little bit of focus to the sound. It boosts the mids for sure a lot, and depending on these settings, you can get some versatile different sounds with it. So let's go through this. I have a whole video where I talk about the importance of setting up sag, hum, ripple, bias, and bias X. It's a pretty in-depth video. I'll link it up here if you're interested in checking that out. But what I just want to talk through is the controls on the Princeton model. I've set the drive pretty low here, so we get a little bit of breakup. Let's go to the bridge pickup. On a Princeton, like I said, it traditionally doesn't have a mid knob. You can kind of consider that the mid setting on an amp that only has bass and treble is just kind of stock, set up wherever the factory decided to put it at. The treble and the bass will do exactly what you want them to. However, they will also greatly affect the volume of the amp. So you'll want to play with the master volume a little bit. I've set up the drive knob here relatively low, the bass pretty high, and the mid's pretty high. Normally you'd come out, especially on a 1x10 speaker, which is pretty, people think smaller speakers don't provide much bass response. I actually found the opposite. I really dig 1x10 speakers, and I find that they put out a lot more bass response than sometimes 12-inch ones do. And I think that has to do with the company trying to make up for the fact that it's a smaller speaker. But what you can do here is dial in plenty of bass, and then to make sure it's not too muddy, make sure you dial in plenty of the low cut here. So 114 is pretty aggressive. Normally I have it around 80 or 90, but 114 for low cut is pretty good. And then I'm using a Shure SM7B model dynamic microphone also, which has plenty of bass response. You'll find that when you play with the distance parameter here in the cabinet, the further you back it off, the less bass response you get. This is a phenomenon known as the proximity effect. Very well known to anyone that has experience miking a guitar cabinet or anything really. The closer you put a microphone to a source, the more bass it's going to pick up. So I've set it back at 2.5, which is a pretty average setting, I'd say. Headphones are definitely recommended for this. So if we run through the rest of the effects that I've dialed up here, you see all the settings on the screen. If you want to download of it, this is a free update that I've made possible through Google Drive. To anyone that has supported the complete preset library in the past, it's a collection of 50 plus Helix presets. I'm always adding to this collection. It's kind of my way of just providing an easy update to anyone that wants access to the presets that I showcase in these videos. But if you don't feel like paying for that, you can always just steal the settings from the screen. That's how it's always been. Let's get into the overdrive option. When you hit foot switch 2 on this preset, it's going to trigger the boost here. It's also going to change parameters in the channel volume. So we're adding a ton more boost through the heir apparent, and then we're making up for the change in volume by dropping the channel volume parameter. So it's adding a little bit of its own gain here with the pedal, but it's also driving the amp harder to distort on its own. However, we're not getting a volume increase because of that parameter adjustment I've changed. I've also made it possible that the EQ block here is changing frequencies, level, and tilt when you engage foot switch 2. This won't do anything, obviously, when the tilt block isn't engaged. This is a great way to have some interaction between foot switch 1 and foot switch 2. So let's just play this and I'll talk about that again in a second. So in other words, to describe this, I've set up the boost on foot switch 2 to really drive the amp, and I've set up some compression and the tilt EQ to change the overall kind of feel of the thing. If you wanted to combine the compression and the boost, now we're also changing some of the EQ parameters here, especially this frequency control. This is going to be a big one. So the tone going into the front of the boost pedal is going to change a little bit, and it's just it's like I said, a cool way to get them to be a little bit more interactive. Since the compressor is heading into the EQ and then into the boost pedal and finally into an already distorting amp, by combining a compressor in front of an overdrive pedal, you end up getting a really smooth sustaining tone. It's great for leads. Yeah, that's the essence of this preset. I'll run through the other ones, the other effects I've added here. Here's a delay setting. Gotta turn the volume on. This is the pitch echo block. I've never really used it before, so I thought I'd throw it in this preset. I'm not using the pitch change on it. If you wanted to, you could cue up like 6 half steps is a tritone, 7 half steps is a fifth. Each repeat, it steps up. What I've done is I set it up to no pitch change. However, the intonation here, cents, it gets flatted by 15 cents each time it repeats. You don't notice it too much, but it's a nice way to get the delay to step out of the way of the guitar. So it works great for solos. Now what also happens here with this parameter here, when you hit foot switch 3, it's going to engage the delay effect, but it's also going to change the mix and the depth controls on the bubble vibrato. You might be interested to know that this is actually always on. So with a mix of 8%, the depth set pretty high, but the speed set low. It's a cool way to add some depth to the sound. You can't even really notice it really. But it is there, and when you hit foot switch 3 to engage the delay, it also changes the parameters here. You saw them adjust, raises the mix way up. So you end up getting delay and some vibrato effect in there. Foot switch 4 is going to control a flanger that I've set up here. I'll show you the settings on that. We don't need to spend time on that. And then foot switch 5 is going to change the settings in the always on glitz verb to switch, or chamber verb, sorry, to switch between a drier and a wet sound. So stock setting, minimum 7.7, and mix 20%. When you engage foot switch 5, it's going to boost that up so you get a much more, basically just much more reverb. Let's look at the next one. We're going to look at Brite Prince now, the Brite Prince preset. EGS stands for electric guitar single. Again, I've tuned them for single coils, but they'll probably work for humbuckers on your instrument as well. So let's just play the stock dry amp tone. This is another way that I like to use Princetons. It depends on the context. If I'm playing in a trio or a quartet where I'm the only guitar player, then I like to use the warmer kind of sound just because it takes up a lot more space. If I'm in a band with another guitar player or maybe another keyboard player and my role is more along the lines of providing a bunch of different wet effects, this would work great in a contemporary church setting. I like to dial in a brighter sound. Because that means it doesn't clutter up the band mix with unnecessary mids and low content. So you can still hear the guitar really well even though the bass is cut out. The mids here are still pretty present, treble's pretty high. The presence control is affecting some upper harmonic content. It works in a traditional tube amp as a negative feedback loop, so the more overdrive the amp produces, the less high end it retains. So to be able to still get a clear sound, a lot of amps have what they call a presence control, and it's a way to send the high end information back in a sort of feedback loop, and it's a way to boost those high frequencies. It can be dangerous on cleaner settings like what we have here because you end up with a really bright sound. At high volumes, that's going to be pretty piercing to your ears. So I set that pretty low, but I do have foot switch 1 controlling this here. The overdrive block I've chosen is the Klon. It's the Minotaur model. So when I engage foot switch 1, it's going to unbypass the Klon, and it's also going to change the presence and the treble controls in the amp. Drops the treble in the amp block and also the presence a little bit. The Klon is kind of top-endy, very mid-centric, so that's why I like to make these changes. Let's listen to it dry and then back-to-back a couple times. Not too much extra overdrive, but it adds some compression, lets you play some slower lines maybe. The Klon pedal in the Helix is one of my favorites. Again, here's the controls for sag, hum, ripple, bias, X. The hum control, it's a really cool thing, not always useful in every situation, but what it does is introduce purposefully some ground hum here. If we turn it up, you might be able to hear that if you've got headphones. And what I like to do is I'll set it as high as possible before it becomes audible. So it's still influencing the sound of the overdrive of that amp block a little bit, but it's not getting in the way and providing stuff that the sound guy is going to have to get rid of later. 7.4 is where I found it to be on this model. I'm also using a 1x12 cabinet with these settings. The 121 ribbon mic is a pretty warm sounding thing. It's based on the Royer 121. I've used that mic a bunch now. It's one of my favorite mics ever. distance 1.5. There's all the settings for that. I always set up the early reflections just a little bit in there. I feel like it gives it some depth. And also I usually have a small verb always on. This is the plate mode. To get into the foot switches here, I'm going to add in the Adriatic delay. It's a bucket brigade style delay with some more parameters than you would normally find on one. I've set it up to be really clean here. So this is essentially how pristine the delay is sounding. 81, 92, whatever that means. It's the cleaner setting. If we dropped it to 1024, you're going to hear it breaks up, it's very dark. That'd be cool if you're trying to get like something that'll kind of be buried behind the mix. But I actually want it to stick out a little bit. I've dialed in some noise here, depth, headroom, that are also all adjusted with foot switch 5. So the foot switch 5 will just basically change the character of the delay if you desire that darker sound. Also introduces more modulation here. Foot switch 3 is the Ganymede verb that I'll have stacked on top of the plate verb. So this is dry when I hit foot switch 3. It's a really nice, just kind of underlying pad. Can be cool for maybe doing some volume swells, especially if you combine it with the delay. Foot switch 4 will just change the LA Studio comp from being always on to off if you desire that. But I tend to like it, especially with this kind of breakup tone on an amp block. I like a little bit of compression at the front, so it lets that gain, that kind of breakup, last a little bit longer, but it doesn't introduce more gain. I think I'm going to do a separate video on that whole philosophy. Let's look at the final preset now. We are on Mad Prince. This is to try and simulate is if you had turned up a Princeton to the max and it was just distorting the crap out of it. Mids are plenty high here. I've dropped the bass so it's not so woofy. I find that as you turn up the drive knob, it gets more and more bass heavy, so you're going to have to turn that down. I'm using the 1x10 cabinet again to simulate kind of a small amp just blowing up, and we're using a Neumann 67 condenser mic on it, which is a cool character, kind of warmer sounding mic. There's all the settings for that, not much to go in there. I'm going to add in the Pocket Fuzz, which is a new addition for Helix 3.0. It's based upon an old fuzz. I looked it up. I'll have to put a picture on the screen now. But essentially it's made just to plug straight into your input jack, I think. It's one of those things. If you've got headphones on right now, you're going to notice there's a lot of really cool low-end content happening here. It's not something that's going to get so muddy, but it is pretty interesting, I think, with this new fuzz pedal. Kind of has a mid-focused sound to it. Foot switch 1 I've set up with a wah block, and this is something I like to do pretty often. I don't use an expression pedal with the Helix anymore. I just found that I prefer to have 2 extra foot switches. But on the wah block, sometimes I'll set it and I'll just leave it at a notched position. It works great for that kind of like Crossroads John Mayer thing. Combine it with the fuzz. Not something that's going to work well in every situation, but it's a cool sound. Good to have access to it. I set up a tape delay with foot switch 3 here. Some cool modulation to it. Foot switch 4, let's see what that's doing again. We're going to engage a phaser if we want to do that. We're using the Pebble phaser, which is also something that can get pretty mid-heavy if you change the color here to on. And I've done that with foot switch 5 actually, so we can hear what this might sound like. It's also going to be changing parameters in the plate verb here. So yeah, kind of cool. A lot of different sound options in this one. Hope you dug this video. Hopefully it was helpful to you. Make sure you share it with a friend and maybe subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more stuff like this. Leave me a comment if you have any questions. I'm usually pretty good at getting back to you. And again, if you're interested in picking up the complete preset library, we're up to over 50 different presets right now. There's a link in the description. All future updates are always free, so as new Helix operating systems, I guess you'd call them, come out, I like to do updates to the preset library so that everyone has access to that. We've had like 300 something supporters, and it's a pretty cool community. I get emails asking and requesting new stuff all the time. I love to hear from people. Take care. Thanks again for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next video.